This Week in Science and Education is presented in association with the Science Coordinators and Consultants Association of Ontario. Visit their website at sccao.ca.
This Week in Science and Education is brought to you in part by the University of Western Ontario, www.uwo.ca. We thank them for their support. This Week in Science and Education is also brought to you by Laurentian University. Check out Laurentian at laurentian.ca. We thank them for their support.
Hi everyone, welcome to This Week in Science and Education. I'm Nicole Tate-Hill. As always, I have Colin Jagoe from the Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board and Thomas Merritt from Laurentian University. And today our guest is Brad Steinberg. And Brad is going to tell us everything we need to know about Algonquin Park. So Brad, why don't you take it away and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Well, as mentioned, my name's Brad, and I'm a naturalist and biologist here in Algonquin Park. And so my job involves with researchers, surveying wildlife populations, and also doing a lot of the communication and outreach to some of the park users and public that come to Algonquin Park. So this might vary from surveying moose populations in the winter to fish populations in the summer to turtles and so on.
So, Brad, we've known each other for a couple of years. You've worked with my wife before. Oh, and I should mention, to my left, your right, is my father, Gilbert Merritt. Say hi, Dad.
Hi, everybody.
And Dad's going to give us
Sorry about that.
Dad's going to give us a perspective for somebody that's been working in the outdoors for more decades than either he or I are going to admit to. Brad, how has your job changed over the last few years? I know you've taken a job switch, but how is the park changing, or where's the park going? And how is it that you're working with one of Canada's sort of natural gems and the public? How does that interface work?
Yeah, I think what has become really important for us is what I'll call the science transfer. And so it's when, when we have research projects going on, monitoring projects, it's about, the really important part seems to be about making sure that information is accessible both to the public as well as to other people in government, so it can be used, basically. And, science, I think, to be relevant has to be accessible to the public and to the, and to, decision makers in government. And that's one of the things that we try to do in Algonquin is take that applied research from out in the field, and then through our public education programs and our websites, podcasts, we actually make that available to the public so it becomes real and it's useful. It's out there.
So give us a couple of numbers. How big is the park? How many projects are going on, and how many people are going through the park?
Yeah. So Algonquin Park is just over 7,600 square kilometers. And so to put that in perspective, that's bigger than Prince Edward Island. There are about 200 to 2, and my mom's from PEI, so I'm allowed to use that reference. There's about 250 researchers in the park during the sort of active May to September season, and they're working on about 70 different research projects. And that's out of, we have a fisheries research station, we have a wildlife research station, and a forestry research reserve as well. And in terms of the public users, we get about 1.1 million people through the park a year, of which about 30% are from outside of Ontario, so international travelers.
There's a lot of interest in the news right now in Canada with research stations and the move away from research stations. Tell us a little bit about the research stations that are in Algonquin. How long have they been there? I mean, I know this is something my wife takes very seriously. She's part of the board there. But, I mean, part of the big deal isn't just that they're there, but how long they've been there and the numbers that are going through there.
That's right. So the first research station in Algonquin Park was established in 1937, and that's Harkness. And it was just a few years later that the Wildlife Research Station was established as well in the 1940s. So they've been in the park for over 75 years. And probably what's one of the most valuable things about that is the long-term data sets that come along with those research stations.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that my wife is working with a data set from the Ron Brooks lab, and they're looking at 35 plus years of data.
Wow.
You know, that kind of data stream in organismal biology is almost unheard of. It's quite a resource to have at your disposal.
One of the things, Brad, that I've always found impressive about Algonquin is some of the stuff you mentioned earlier and the communication you do with the public. Whenever you go to Algonquin, you can always grab a pamphlet or a flyer or something that talks about the research that's going on and the science that's going on and what's actually being done in the park. And you talked about that there's 70 projects going on. There's obviously not, we're not hearing about all of them. And the reason I'm asking this question is we talked to Jim Hanman from CBC's Quirks and Quarks a few weeks ago about how they parse out what to present in terms of interesting science. How do you guys decide, from all of the things that are going on in the park, what makes a good story to then put in say, one of the park publications?
Yeah, that's a good question. Really, it's a challenge because there's so much neat stuff going on, and we generally try to go with what we think are some of the discoveries that highlight the overall importance of Algonquin Park. So, as an example, last year, some of our fisheries researchers were netting some of the interior lakes, and they found a fish that is listed by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature as extinct. And they found lots of them. And so they literally discovered an extinct species in the park. And so we thought that's a really neat story to tell. And so we made sure we wrote it up and made that available to the public.
Are they tasty?
I'm not allowed to answer that.
Yeah, you're going to pretend you don't know. Did you have a question?
Yeah. I camped in the Algonquin years ago, and I thought it was a wonderful place. I just wondered, you say 1.1 million people. I've got a feeling that they are probably in 10% of the park, and the rest of it is pretty much wild and untouched. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Probably 90% of our users just come through the main highway area of the park. So there's a highway runs through the south part of the park, and that's where our organized campgrounds are, and that's where 90% of our users are. And so for those people who want a canoe trip into the interior of the park, you can still have a pretty amazing wilderness experience in the interior of the park without being shoulder to shoulder with the other 900,000 people.
And I can personally attest to that. Jackie and I were hiking in the park, and I think the park gets a lot of canoe travel, but we ran into two other groups in the entire week that we were out hiking. It was a fantastic experience.
Yeah, and just the reason I guess I was thinking about that is that it is a wilderness research reserve, even though there are 1.1 million people that are touching around the edge. So the research you're doing is being done in a wilderness, not in a public park.
That's right, and we do have certain areas of the park that are reserved just for research. So we do have a couple of reserve areas that are specifically just for conducting research, and then we also do have sections of the park where there's much more human influence. So we do have active forest management in Algonquin, so there's logging here, and what it does is for research is it provides a great opportunity to look at the effects of logging on certain species and have control areas close by to compare and contrast with. And in fact, a lot of the rules around logging in Ontario are based off of research that has been conducted here in Algonquin Park.
Maybe you could follow up on that. I know that when Jackie and I went down and met you and you gave us a tour around the park, one of the things that impressed me was the way the park manages to balance not just science and research and public use, but science and research, public use, and a very active industrial timber industry. How is that done practically, but how's it also done, what's the idea behind that? How is that handled from a philosophical point of view?
Yeah. probably the philosophical point of view is the most challenging for people to get a grip on, because I think Algonquin's one of the only parks in North America, if not the world, that allows industrial logging to take place. Right. But the reality is the park was created to protect the forest industry. So back in 1893, part of the reasoning for creating Algonquin was to prevent settlement from getting rid of all that wood and burning it away, basically. In fact, at the time, there were lumber barons who actually requested that Algonquin be extended to protect their timber limits. And so we balanced that, logging and with the protection of values, a couple of different layers. One is by having a lot of the really special ecosystems in the park are protected through zoning. So we have really only about half of the park is available for logging at any given time. But even of that, less than 1% of the park is logged in any given year. So while logging does take place in the park, it's really a small fraction of the whole in any given year. So, and where it does take place, usually we can separate that in space and time from where the users are in the park. So, for example, in the winter, there's a lot more logging occurring in the interior of the park because there's no canoe tripping going on. So we managed to balance those things pretty well. Not seamlessly. We do get, some concerned folks here and there, but that's part of our job is to, make sure that the forest industry continues to contribute to the local economy, as well as protect all those values that the park was established for.
Maybe give us an idea about, one of the things I remember talking to you about was funding and how much money we're talking about with the timber industry. Parks are not free, and I think sometimes we miss the idea that they have to be paid for somehow, and nobody wants to just simply be raising taxes. So how do you balance the income from industry with running the park? Yeah, well, actually, that's an interesting topic. The actual income from industry doesn't come back to Algonquin Park. So that goes out and that supports the local communities and keeps people working. And to sort of put that in perspective, that's around 2,000 jobs in local communities around the park. Algonquin Park is almost entirely run off of user fees. So when someone comes to the park and they pay $16 for their day pass, that's what funds, managing the museums and the research programs and the park rangers and all those. That all comes through that. And in fact, Algonquin Park covers over 100% of its costs through those user fees. So we're actually not run operationally on tax dollars. We're run on user fees, which is actually something that's fairly unique for protected areas. I think it might be entirely unique. I remember you telling me that this was the goal for parks, but that nobody actually gets anywhere close to that goal. So are you really close to breaking even? Yeah, well, Ontario parks as a whole, so the system of parks in Ontario is around 80 cents on the dollar, so fairly close. Algonquin Park's actually over that. But we also support other parks elsewhere in Ontario that have other goals other than revenue generation. So sure, and yeah, so we're in a pretty good shape. Yeah, because you're Canadian, you're modest, and so you don't want to tell us that you're actually doing better than you have to do. That's fair. That's fair. Colin, yeah. tie us into the classroom. How does this work into a classroom?
Because Algonquin's the greatest classroom in Ontario, and I can say that having done probably 15 canoe trips with high school students from my outdoor education class into the backcountry. So it's far and away the best classroom we have access to. One of the questions I had, I'm thinking about the research. One of the neat things that always strikes me is the ability in Algonquin for citizens and students as well to do some research, to contribute to, like you mentioned, the moose surveys, but there's always like loon surveys and things like that where people can actively take notice of their environment as they go into the backcountry on a canoe trip, record things down, and then give that data back to, I'm assuming it goes to a scientist or to you guys who are performing some of this research. Can you talk to me a bit about that sort of citizen science program and how that all ties together?
Sure, yeah. One of the things that we do in Algonquin is things like record things like the number of loons that are observed in the interior and things like bird migration and so on. And we really solicit and encourage the public to report those things for a couple of reasons. One is it's really valuable science, and we just don't have the resources to be everywhere all the time. And the other thing is that part of it is we've been doing it for a long time. It just sort of, it started, we've been recording this information since the 60s. But we've really found is, especially in the last decade, some of this information has just been vital for providing insight into things like climate change. So, for example, with bird migration data, and we have the public comes in, records which birds they see and when, and we record, when the first black-throated blue sparrow or warbler is back in Algonquin. And what we've been able to show from that public and staff contribution of bird migration data is that birds are coming back earlier. And there's a significant increase in how early they're migrating back to Algonquin, and how late they leave, and that's attributed to climate change. So there's really an opportunity to directly contribute to science from the public.
Thanks very much, Brad. So we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors, and we'll be back in just a minute.
This Week in Science and Education is brought to you by Sheridan Institute of Technology and Advanced Learning. At Sheridan, students shine brighter. Check out sheridanc.on.ca.
So we're back. Colin, you had a great question for Brad that we had to cut out just before we went to the break. Would you like to ask Brad your question again?
I was wondering about other educational programs, the kind of things that students and teachers might do if we loaded up a bus and headed into Algonquin. What kind of programs do you have there for outreach, for classes?
Sure. We've got an entire group education program for classes and adults. And that can involve going out and doing wildflower hikes, learning about ponds and aquatic species, going on wolf howls. Probably one of our most popular programs is an overnight program in the Park Museum, the visitor center, where the class comes and they actually stay overnight and sleep in amongst the exhibits in the museum. And so there's a whole suite of different programs. And if you go on our website, which is algonquinpark.on.ca, there's a link to all the programs that are available there.
Cool.
Okay, before we lose that, I think you need to explain to people what a wolf howl is.
Good call, yeah. So one of our signature programs in Algonquin Park, in fact, it was just nominated as a signature Canadian experience, is literally talking to wolves. So Algonquin has 35 packs of wolves. They're wild. They're out there. They're not leashed or anything like that. And one of the things that our researchers discovered back in the 1960s is that wolves will respond to a human howling like a wolf. And so what we do is we'll take people out and locate a wolf pack, usually in August or September. We'll take them out and we'll howl for wolves in order to try and get that wolf that pack to howl back. And we generally are successful about 80% of the time in getting a response from a wild pack of wolves.
So, Dad, you've been taking groups of kids into the woods since the 1950s. Can you imagine anything cooler than a wolf howl?
I think that just sounds like something I want to do.
Yeah,
I mean, the heck with high school kids. That appeals to adults as well as high school kids.
We may be visiting you tomorrow. Let me ask, I think we're probably tight on time. Colin, you got a question?
Oh, no, I just wanted to say, like I said, I've done about 15 canoe trips with students, and only once were we successful in the backcountry at getting a return from across the lake. I believe it was on McCrae Lake, sort of north of the Highway 60 corridor. But it was the coolest experience.
Yep.
I'll remember it till the day I die, and those kids will never forget it either. It was amazing.
And that might have been Brad, actually.
Yeah.
Could have been,
So,
I suppose.
Brad, I mean, the park is this amazing gym. I mean, we use the idea of a gym and, such and such. The park is a gym. It is a phenomenal place. We've interacted a bit. You interact quite a bit with my wife. I know how good you are at your job and how hard you work at your job. And it is the place that it is because of the people that work there and have made it and maintain it the place that it is. Where is it going next? You've been there a while. You're part of the way the park is run. You're one of the reasons it's successful now. Where is it going in the next 5 years, the next 10 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's, the park is basically going to continue to encourage research. We're going to continue to try and be a great place for people to come and experience nature. I think one of the things that we would really like to achieve and to encourage is more Canadians, especially newer Canadians, experiencing nature and having meaningful connections with the outdoors. And so that's something that we're really looking to try and enhance, is being that gateway for people to have meaningful connections with nature. And that's a direction that we're interested in pursuing further. Actually, I wanted to make a quick plug for anyone who's watching. I started working in Algonquin Park when I was 16. And there are lots of really good summer jobs in parks that are a heck of a lot of fun and can lead to great careers. And so I would really encourage people to, if you're interested in doing what I'm doing, there's lots of opportunity. So lots of fun and lots of good jobs. So if you're interested, just check out our website, give me an email or a call, and we'll point you in the right direction.
Very cool.
That's a great point.
Thank you very much, Brad. Thanks for being with us. And that was This Week in Science and Education. So until next time.